like and subscribe, and leave a comment below. Beyond Antarctica, Chapter 40. The air was thick with tension as John stepped out of the main hall. The sun barely filtered through the heavy clouds, lighting up the gray fog around Sanctuary. He turned to the assembled group, with his gaze hard as steel. "We have a mission, people, scouting the coast as they strengthen Sanctuary's defenses. I remind you, every minute we sit is the difference between life and death." Jackson, standing nearby, nodded grimly, already calculating the tasks ahead. "We will triple the ballistas and build additional guard towers along the perimeter, but if they bring an entire clan, I fear we'll need more than walls and wooden weapons. Then we hope that the ship is still at the coast. If it's there, we have a chance. If not," John's voice trailed off, leaving the unspoken threat hanging in the gray, foggy air. Kim glanced at her father, with her eyes filled with fear. "Dad, we can't count on running. We have to be ready to fight." John's face softened for a moment before he steeled himself again. "Kim, we'll do both if we have to. Jackson will fortify and train the younger ones." He looked to Kim. "You, Bob, and I will lead the scouting team to the coast." Destin arrived with a group of teen volunteers. "Ready to move out, sir." The scouting team moved silently through the dense jungle. John and Bob took the lead, flanked by 2 volunteers. The ground was uneven, and every snapped branch sent waves of anxiety rippling through the group. A haunting silence filled the jungle, broken only by the occasional distant roar of the unseen predators. Every shadow seemed to hold potential threats. The quiet only heightened their nerves, as if the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something that only the jungle knew was there. Despite their anxiety, their journey remained uneventful. As they crested the hill, the horizon spread out before them. He took in the sight of the vast open sea. John froze, his eyes locking onto a sight. It was like a mirage. For a brief, heart-pounding moment, relief washed over him. It was the Celeb Mariner. Their ship was still there. It was an impossible stroke of luck, or so he thought, but the relief was fleeting as movement in the water caught his attention, a growing mass breaking through the waves. With a terrifying synchronization, hundreds of giants were swimming toward the Celeb Mariner, with their shoulders and arms crashing through the waves, propelling their colossal forms through the water with an unnerving grace. With grim expressions carved into their faces, their eyes were set on the Celeb Mariner. With a clear intent, a deadly tide was sweeping toward their ship, threatening their only way home. "What are they doing?" Kim broke the silence, her voice trembling with horror as she stared at the unfolding nightmare. "On the beach," she pointed, where Bick and a few other crew members were scrambling to push a small dinghy into the waves. The urgency in their movements was unmistakable. They were pushing with every ounce of strength they had, their faces masked in terror as they made a desperate dash toward the Celeb Mariner. Bick was yelling something, his voice carried away by the breeze, but the panic in his tone was clear. Just as the dinghy reached the ship, the anchor came up, and with practiced skill, the crew members began to maneuver the vessel away from shore as if they could somehow outwit the horde of giants closing in. A loud, wooden twang echoed across the water. The first of the Celeb Mariner's trebuchets fired, sending a massive load arcing through the sky. It splashed down yards from the giants, sending a shower of seawater high into the air. The ship's second trebuchet followed suit. Each shot seemed to do little more than create a wall of spray, momentarily obscuring the advancing giants, it failing to even slow them down. "Give them hell, Bick," Kim's voice broke out, filled with pride. Several of the giants paused in their furious swim, each raising their arms to heave their spears toward the Celeb Mariner. The spears arced through the air with menacing speed, slicing the sky like dark harbingers, but they fell short, splashing into the churning sea just shy of the ship. On board, Bick and his crew watched with anticipation as more giants threw their spears. The Mariner pushed forward. They plowed through the waves to the open sea and deeper waters. As the seconds passed, it became clear that the relentless giants were closing the gap on the ship. As the giants' frustrated cries echoed over the water, Bick turned to his crew. signaling for the trebuchets to reload, his gaze steady with resolve. The Mariner's bow sliced through the ocean's swells, gathering speed as they moved further and further from the shallows. Another round of spears flew, but the gap was still too great. Each weapon splashed just shy of its mark, but with each passing wave, the giants grew closer. It was only a matter of minutes now. John's face was a mask of grim concern. "He's going to get my ship sunk," he muttered, his voice low and filled with dread. "They're too fast. There's too many of them." The giants, undeterred by the bombardment, swam with astonishing speed, closing the gap on the Celeb Mariner despite the best efforts of the trebuchets. Then, just as the fourth shot hit the water, Bob's voice cut through the rising tension. "Look!" he shouted, pointing past the giants with a strange intensity. "He's not aiming for them, John. Look out there." The others squinted toward the horizon. The surface of the ocean began to roil and froth, the waves churning violently as a line of enormous, sleek fins broke the surface. A dark grin spread across John's face as he understood what Bick was doing. Brilliant, Bick. Just brilliant. "Wow, what a clever move," Bob mumbles, Kim blinking in confusion. "What move? What did I miss?" The giants were too focused on the ship to notice the approaching danger. One by one they paused, some glancing back as a dreadful realization took hold. A lone giant, lingering in the center of the formation, let out a guttural bellow as the water around him erupted, bubbles swirling violently. Suddenly, he was yanked beneath the waves, leaving nothing but a chaotic foam in his place. The other giants began to thrash, desperate to reach the shore, but the creatures of the depths were already surrounding them, corralling them into a tightening mass. The giants, realizing the impending danger, thrashed in the water, their huge arms carving through the waves as they desperately tried to swim to shore. Panic spread among them as dark fins began circling, cutting through the water with eerie precision, closing in with every second. Those who reached the outer edge of the group tried to break free. Their mighty strokes were powerful, but futile. The unseen predators moved with terrifying coordination, herding the giants into a tighter circle, each movement corralling them like prey. A low, guttural roar erupted from one giant as a powerful force dragged him under, the surface bursting with bubbles and blood as he vanished from sight. The rest of the giants screamed in terror, with their cries echoing over the churning waves as they pushed harder toward the shore. But the water around them surged as a colossal set of jaws snapped up from beneath the waves, grabbing one giant by the leg and pulling him under with brutal force. The giants' formation shattered as they each struggled against the relentless predators. Their powerful limbs were no match for the ruthless jaws that sliced through them like a knife through warm butter. Some proud warriors fought back, trying to defend those being attacked, but to no avail. One by one, they disappeared beneath the waves. The ocean grew red as the last of their cries faded into silence, leaving only a frothing, bloody sea in their wake. "What's happening?" Kim's eyes widened as she clung to her father's arm. John chuckled darkly. "The trebuchets weren't firing stones, Kim. They were throwing chum, baiting those leviathans to the giants." Todd let out a low laugh, grinning. "For a city slicker, Bick sure is adapting fast in this new world." Their relief was short-lived. The water near the shoreline heaved, a huge shape breaking the surface with a roar that sent shivers down their spines. Two giants, somehow surviving the carnage, stumbled out of the water, gasping and clawing their way up the sand. The two giants, visibly worn and leaning heavily on their spears like canes, looked like the last standing warriors of a battle they hadn't entirely won. The smaller of the two slouched, his chest heaving with each labored breath. Yet there was a resilience in his posture, a dogged refusal to let fatigue topple him. The larger giant, however, was different. His presence was almost regal, defined by his broad shoulders, chiseled muscles, and a gleaming golden helmet atop his head. He casted an aura of command. This was no ordinary giant. He moved with purpose and authority, his eyes fixed on the open sea as if daring it to try again. Together, they waded into the waist-high waves, scanning the horizon for any sign of life. any remnant of what had been lost. Their voices rang out in mournful tones as they called into the void, their powerful cries reverberating over the water, but no reply met their ears. As their calls faded, the silence hung heavy between them, a recognition settling that no one would be calling back. The larger giant looked over his shoulder at the island, as if reluctant to leave the sea and his fallen comrades behind, while the smaller giant watched him, with their unspoken grief binding them in that moment. But just as the larger giant took a step forward, the smaller one halted him, raising his spear with a swift, sharp motion and pointed toward the hillside. Following his gaze, the larger giant squinted, and their muscles stiffened. As their eyes fell on John and the crew watching from the hilltop, the air turned electric with tension as the giants held their ground, studying the small figures that dared to observe them. "They see us," John murmured. The crew braced themselves. "If they charge," he continued in a low voice, "we retreat down the hill, turn hard right into the woods. We move fast and we don't look back, on my signal." As the giant stares bore down on them, a growing sense of dread gripped the crew, each second feeling stretched and amplified. Suddenly, a thunderous splash erupted from the ocean behind the giants. The two behemoths whipped around, their attention now fully consumed by whatever lurked in the waves. As they turned to look back, a colossal sea creature lunged from the depths, snapping its jaws over the two giants in a single bone-crushing movement before vanishing back into the watery abyss below, leaving a foamy bloodstain in its wake. Kim pressed a hand over her mouth, with horror etched on her face. What the hell was that? John's gaze never wavered, his expression cold and unfeeling. "That's what you call nature taking its course." He scanned the scene. "Sanctuary will be safe, for now," he mumbled. Kim's face softened, a glimmer of hope lighting her features as she realized the threat of the giants might be over. But John's eyes drifted back to the sea, catching a glimpse of the Celeb Mariner moving steadily toward deeper waters. He shook his head slowly, his heart sinking as realization set in. "Look," he said, pointing toward the distant vessel as it headed out to the open sea. Is he leaving?" Kim's voice cracked, her despair on full display. John's jaw tightened. "It doesn't look like he's turning around." The group's hearts dropped as the Celeb Mariner moved further and further away, with its silhouette shrinking into the horizon. "No!" Kim's body trembling as she stared at the receding ship. She turned to her father, her eyes desperate. "We can't let him leave, Dad. He's our only way off this island." "And what would you have me do?" John rested a hand on her shoulder, his gaze steady but somber. "It looks like we might be a day too late, love. I fear that after facing a clan of warrior giants and seeing their monstrous strength, their merciless ferocity, Bick may have finally reached his breaking point. He's braved impossible odds before, stared down dangers that would turn most men back, but this was something else. Watching giants charge through the water like a force of nature, chucking spears at you, it's enough to make even the bravest reconsider, and with every ounce of determination needed just to keep the ship afloat amidst that chaos, maybe he finally decided enough was enough. Maybe he saw the grim future that awaited us all on this god-forsaken island, coming to the conclusion that no one could live long in such a place, and after this long with no word from us. He must have figured we must be dead, and if that's the case, he may as well pack up his courage, his grit, and his loyalty, and he should just sail off to find home, protecting the crew I left in his care. Bob lowered his head, his voice filled with resignation. "Can't blame him, really," he mumbled, sinking to one knee as if the weight of their predicament had finally settled on his shoulders. Tony's face contorted with desperation as he scanned the hillside. "Quick, we need to make a fire, signal him, maybe he'll turn back." John shook his head, his voice filled with the bitter acceptance of the inevitable. "Don't bother, Tony. He'll be out of view before we can get the fire started." So there they stood, their hopes of returning home fading with the sight of their ship disappearing into the distant vastness of the sea before them. "We've survived this long. We'll keep going." His gaze was hard, determined. "We have no other choice." The crew fell silent, united in the quiet understanding that they were now truly on their own. Just then, Todd shouted. "John, look!" The beach below. Bick left a message in the sand. He pointed eagerly down toward the shoreline, where a series of rocks had been carefully arranged, though parts of the formation appeared disturbed. Kim leaned in, eyes wide. "Quick, let's go see what it says." But John immediately reached out, grabbing her arm. "No, we're only sending Todd and Tony down. That beach isn't safe." Bob chimed in, his voice low. "Honestly, I don't think that thing would bother with us. We're too small, not worth its effort." Kim scoffed. "And you're willing to bet on that? I'd rather take my chances waiting up here than testing that theory out." She looked at Todd and Tony, her brow furrowing. "Let Tony and Todd go," she mumbled. Tony glanced over his shoulder with a smirk. "Thanks, Kim. Yeah, I'm willing to risk my life so you can stay safe," he called as he started his descent with Todd, picking their way carefully down the rocky path toward the beach. Kim shouts out, "That's not what I meant," Tony says with a smirk. "Yeah, I know what you meant, hon," elbowing Todd, whispering, "That girl is just too easy to mess with." As they neared the message, they could see Bick's original formation had been disturbed by the blood-stained sand and the carnage left behind by the giant's encounter. Tony squatted down, studying the rocks as he glanced around, his gaze lingering uneasily on the crimson-tinted waves that lapped ominously at the shore. "Half of it's missing," he muttered. Todd, squinting as he pieced the message together aloud, added, "Seems to read John," then a gap, something about the ship being too far, an S, and then ISL, maybe island. Tony clapped him on the shoulder. "It's gotta mean he's moved the ship to the far side of the island. Makes sense with all the activity here." Todd's face lit up, excitement breaking through his unease. "We need to get this back to John, now." Rushing back to the rest of the crew, Todd and Tony quickly filled John in on their conclusions about Bick's message. John scanned the horizon thoughtfully, then turned to Destin. "Send the rest of the volunteers back to Sanctuary," he instructed. "Let them know what happened here and assure them they're safe, at least for now. Destin, you're coming with us," he continued. "We'll follow the beach, keep close to the tree line, and hopefully we'll track down our ship." With each step, the haunting echoes of what they'd witnessed weighed heavily on their minds. Shadows stretched long over the sand, fueling their unease, but they pressed onward, driven by a single purpose, to find the Celeb Mariner. This is not goodbye, nor the end. Until the story continues, my friends. B.N.Rocker.